Welcome to Stress-Free Solutions with Sarah. I'm your host, Sarah Elise, a stress management and fitness coach, advocating the world to trust their gut more often. I discuss various ways to manage stress and share personal stories of guest experts who have gone through the same stressors as all of you at home. Hey there, super moms of the universe. Let's play a game called hide and seek. No, not with your kids or that mysteriously vanishing left sock. It's time to seek out you in the everyday hide and seek of life. Introducing Mastering the Soul System, a 12-week journey to reclaim your time and energy. This course is your gateway to finding balance, energy, and joy in every aspect of your bustling life. Picture this, 12 weeks where the words mom and mayhem don't always go together. Rediscover yourself with every breath in our Soulful Mind Weeks. Sing out loud in the shower or car, off-key is absolutely fine, and dance during our Soulful Body sessions, and embrace the quiet whispers of your heart in our Soulful Spirit adventures. It's about time your spirit got a front row seat, don't you think? Join us on this journey. Embrace the harmony between being a dedicated mom and your personal aspirations. Mastering the soul system, because darling, in the noise, find your silence. And maybe, just maybe, a bit of that elusive thing called me time. You deserve to thrive, not just survive. So come on, slide into our world at www.livewellenhanceyou.com/soul system. Your journey back to you starts now.
Mallary Tenore Tarpley is a journalism professor at the University of Texas at Austin. She is a journalist by trade, and her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, Teen Vogue, and more. She is also the author of the forthcoming memoir, Slip, Life in the Middle of Eating Disorder Recovery, which blends personal narrative, reportage, and science to offer up a new framework for understanding eating disorder recovery as a middle place where slips happen, but progress is always possible. Mallory, I'm so excited to talk to you today. Thank you for coming for Stress-Free Solutions. It means a lot.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
What made you decide to say, you know what? I need to write this book now.
So for a long time, I thought that I had to be fully recovered from my eating disorder in order to write my book. I wrote different iterations along the way, but I would often put them on the back burner and put them aside because I would think, well, my ending hasn't happened yet. I haven't reached that full recovery, so there's no way I can put this book out into the world. And then it occurred to me that there were a lot of books about eating disorders, but they were all written from the same perspective, from people who were fully recovered. And those books were helpful to me in a lot of ways. And I don't want to discredit those narratives because they're important. But I really felt like there was this lack of a mirrored image because I couldn't see my own story reflected in those books as someone who was better, but not all better, and as someone who is in recovery, but not fully recovered. So I began to wonder, what would it be like to write about what it is like living in this middle space in between acute sickness and full recovery, knowing that I'm better, but that my disorder still remains a vulnerability. So I decided that there was a real opportunity there to tell a different story. And for a long time, I thought I was the only one in this place because in the eating disorder field, the middle place is not a well-known term, though I'm trying to change that with this book. And it's not really talked about, and often it can be stigmatized. But when I was working on the book, I surveyed over 700 people with lived experience, and 85% of them said that they could identify with the middle place. So I thought, there's something here, and I want to write a book that helps people in this place to feel seen and heard.
Now, as you're continuing to go through this, for you, your slips, what was the most unexpected or validating discovery that came from hearing so many of those people that were going through middle place experiences?
Well, I heard from a lot of people who said that they had largely remained silent about where they were at in their recovery because they felt ashamed to admit that they hadn't reached that gold standard of full recovery. And they didn't have the words to really describe where they were at in their recovery. So either they wouldn't talk about where they were at all, or they would say that they were fully recovered because they felt like that was the narrative they had to uphold. And I, for a long time, was in that same situation where even when I relapsed years ago, I still told people that I was fully recovered, even though I was still very much struggling. So there's often, for those of us with lived experience, this disconnect between the narratives we share or don't share with the world and the ones we're actually living out. So a lot of people told me that this, in some ways, gave them permission to actually start talking more about where they're at. And I got this real sense that there's power in naming something and in calling this gray space a middle place. Because for far too long in the eating disorder field, we've referred to this space, if you will, as either quasi recovery or pseudo recovery, which are very common terms in the field.
Mhm.
And I don't think that they're intended to be pernicious, but they often are because they can lead people to feel as though they are kind of experiencing something that's not real or that they're somehow faking their recovery. So, for a lot of people, I got this real sense that the expansion of language and the removal of stigma and shame around slips in the middle place was really freeing. And so, I hope that this framework is going to help readers feel the same way.
Let's talk about slips because, in your view, you kind of look at slips as you said, more of a gray area. But how can we reframe them from failure to feedback? And how did that shift impact your own healing?
So it impacted my healing a lot because when I was in college, I relapsed and I was basically binge eating and restricting. And so my eating disorder had changed a bit from when I was a child and I was merely restricting. So in college, I was binging for the first time and I really didn't know what it was I was struggling with. I felt like I was failing at full recovery and failing at anorexia. And every time I slipped, it turned into a slide. So if I ate a pint of ice cream, for instance, one night, then that was this green light to then go eat the whole bag of chips and eat the muffins in my room and whatever else was in my mini fridge. And then I would think, well, I'll just restrict the whole next day. And it was this sort of constant slipping and sliding that was happening. And often when I had these moments of thinking, "Ugh, I can't keep doing this, I would say, well, I'll start anew tomorrow, or I'll try to start anew next week once I get through these deadlines. But I would always be putting it off. And it wasn't until I was in my late 20s that I began to reframe my thinking around slips. And I questioned what would it mean if I looked at slips not as grounds for failure, but as opportunities for growth? What if I normalize them rather than stigmatizing them? Because when we stigmatize them, it can leave us feeling really defeated. Whereas if we think about them as these moments of growth, we can then look at the slip and say, okay, I slipped. That's okay. Why did I slip? What was going on? Who can I talk to about this slip, right? So that it's not thriving in secrecy. And then how do I get back up now? Not later today, not tomorrow, not next week. How do I try to do it now? And how do I give myself grace, knowing that slips happen, but progress is always possible? So that reframing has been really instrumental for me in my own recovery.
Now, I know we both experienced loss at a young age. I lost my father. And when you have such profound loss, there's a lot of grief and trauma that intertwines with the beginnings of an eating disorder. For me, it was emotional eating. And I'm curious, how did that shape your understanding of the path to recovery or slips later on?
Yes. Well, I'm sorry about your loss. And I can definitely relate as someone who lost my mom to cancer when I was 11. And that trauma really led to the onset of my eating disorder. And part of why it did was because I thought that by staying small, I could somehow remain closer to my mother. In some ways, I felt like if growing up meant living without my mother, then I wanted to stay little forever. So I began to restrict my food because I thought maybe if I stay the same size that I was when my mom was alive, I could somehow be closer to her. So food restriction was almost this work form of time travel. And in my recovery, I had to recognize that it was really important to find other ways of maintaining bonds and ties to my mother apart from anorexia, recognizing that the disorder initially may have made me feel safer. Maybe it initially got me care and attention that I needed in the aftermath of my mother's death. But ultimately, it left me feeling really far away from my mom because the eating disorder completely overtook my identity to the point where I didn't even see myself anymore as my mother's daughter. I just saw myself as the girl with anorexia. So in recovery, I had to recognize that there were other ways that I could feel special, other ways that I could be close to my mom with, without needing to restrict my food intake. And I will say, too, as I think about grief and loss, I think about it with regard to the middle place, because even though the middle place is really something I talk about with regard to eating disorders, it's also an apt metaphor for grief and loss. I've never arrived at a place of closure, even though I'm now 40 and I lost my mom many years ago. I still feel the weight of that loss. I felt it very recently, a couple months ago, when I turned 40, because that's the same age my mom was when she died. So I'm now outliving my mother. And that load of the loss has lightened over time, but it's still there, right? I'm still in this middle place with grief. So there's so many interesting parallels between my mother's death, my sickness, and then my standing in the middle place.
What are some of the practices or mindsets you leaned on most when navigating the middle place, especially during that?
So one thing I tend to think about a lot is this idea of more recovery. So I try to ask myself, how can I make choices that are in service of more recovery? Rather than thinking about the perfectionistic ideal of full recovery, I think about more recovery day by day could lead to a fuller expression of it. So it's very easy to fixate on when we've done wrong. And instead, I try to celebrate these small wins and victories when I've chosen more recovery, whether it means that I decided to have ice cream because I wanted it rather than saying I shouldn't have it, right? Or maybe it's just saying, you know what, my body's really tired today. I feel like I should run, but I'm going to just slow it down and just go for a gentle walk today, right? Those for
Mhm.
me, as someone in recovery, are choices that are really in service of a healthier life. I also think a lot about this phrase opposite action. So, still, my eating disorder will try to tell me what I should and shouldn't do on certain occasions. And sometimes it will tell me, well, you don't need to have that much rice for dinner, right? You could take a little bit of rice out of that bowl. But I will often tell myself opposite action, right? In terms of thinking about how can I act in opposition to those disordered thoughts that I still grapple with, even though I've been in recovery for 20 plus years. So, thinking about that opposite action can often lead me to make better choices in recovery.
I love that. I think that's very helpful for people. What kind of takeaway do you hope that your book can give to those that are going through eating disorders?
So, I really hope it will help people to understand eating disorders a lot more because collectively, we have a very kind of low understanding of what eating disorders are and who they affect. There are so many misconceptions and stereotypes about who does and doesn't struggle. So, in the book, I talk a lot about my own personal experiences getting diagnosed and treated for anorexia. But I also include the latest research on eating disorders. I look out how eating disorders affect the brain, how genetics play into eating disorders, and I write about it in a way that's very accessible so that if you don't know a whole lot about these topics, you'll be able to come away with a deeper understanding. But I also interviewed over 75 people, many of whom have different types of eating disorders and who look different than I do, because in many ways, I do fit that stereotypical image of someone with an eating disorder. I'm white, I identify as female, I'm middle to upper class, I live in a smaller body. So I wanted to talk to other people whose experiences have not been like mine. And in many cases, that brought to light a lot of challenges that we still face in the field in terms of making sure that everyone who needs care is able to actually get it and that they're not stigmatized. So my hope is that in reading this book, people will find points of relatability, and they'll also come away with a much deeper understanding of how to detect these disorders, how to get treatment for them, and also how to think about recovery in terms of just this middle place, right? And
Right.
recognizing that it's nuanced and messy and imperfect.
Honesty plays such a central role in your recovery story. And I know it's very difficult for people to be honest with themselves. But what does radical honesty look like when you're still facing this disorder day in and day out?
That honesty is so important. And I acknowledge that it's also really hard because for many people who are in the middle place, it can be challenging to admit that you're not all better. And sometimes, in being honest, you then have to contend with the fact that you may have to do away with a particular behavior that you have developed as a coping mechanism. And that can be really daunting to think about. But for me, I made a very conscious decision once I began writing this book that I wanted to go back to therapy and that I wanted to start seeing a dietitian because I knew that in writing this book, it could be somewhat triggering for me, just having to go back into the past and look at old journal entries and medical records from when I was at my sickest. And then also just interviewing people day in and day out about eating disorders made me think, I need to make sure I'm protecting myself. So I always say if you still feel like you need therapy, great. And even if you feel like you don't, you might still need it, right? Because a lot of times you might think, well, I'm fine. But then when something happens, like a big transition or something unexpected, those are the moments when it's really helpful to have a clinician to talk with. So I do that. But then I also just confide in my husband. So I've really tried to make a concerted effort to have him be the person who I talk to when I slip. And it doesn't happen every single slip. I mean, sometimes there are moments where I think this feels too hard. But by and large, I really try to bring him into that conversation and be honest because I recognize that in those moments when I have a harder time being honest about the slips, those are the moments when those slips are more likely to really kind of inch closer to a slide. And my kind of goal in the middle place is to always be moving forward. So that honesty is an integral part of that forward movement.
That's incredible. I love the work you're doing. I also think it's cool that you're a professor too, and you're helping the next generation write and research. And I feel that's really needed in our country right now. Just that idea of continually speaking up for injustice. What are some ways that we as consumers can do a better job of researching so that we don't go on? Because I've seen this a lot with my client as a health coach and a fitness professional, that sometimes they'll take the internet's word for it versus a scientific journal. What are some ways we can better consumers to make sure that we are consuming good material for ourselves?
Yes, that's a really important question. It's always helpful to look at just the source of the information and making sure that you are gathering information from a diversity of sources as opposed to just seeing a Facebook post or Instagram post and thinking it's gospel. But it's also really important to note that a lot of the messaging that we hear in stories and social media posts are often rooted in diet culture and fat phobia. And those messages often are telling us that our bodies are not good enough or that our weight determines our worth. And so it's really important to recognize that because it's so easy to just be taking in all of these diet culture messages and then constantly thinking that there's something wrong with our bodies and that there's something that we need to change, right? This often happens with even marketing, where there's all this marketing about a skin product that works excellent and it just works wonders. And then you try and you think, well, it didn't work for me. I must be the problem, right? It's my body that's the issue because my body is just not responding to it in the right ways. And so there's all these ways that sort of this messaging can impact how we see ourselves and how we live in the world. So it's important to be conscious of that as we're consuming messages. And we can't dismantle diet culture anytime soon, but we can call it out and try to defy it. I think about this with my kids who are 7 and 9. And when we were streaming a movie on Disney Plus the other day, all of these ads for GLP-1 drugs came on the screen. And I thought, why are these being advertised during a kids' movie? But it was my way of being able to talk with them about these messages and have conversations with them and say, for some people, these drugs can be helpful, right? If they've got diabetes, or for some people who feel like they want to lose weight, but you will constantly be bombarded with messaging that will tell you that you need to take up less space and live in a smaller body. And I don't want you to grow up believing that that's the case. So that's the type of messaging I try to impart.
Mallory, I can't tell you how many of my clients after giving birth is when they start to think about it. I guess our hormones are all over the place and some of our subconscious beliefs come to the front. And a lot of them are like, oh, maybe I should go on one of those GLP-1s. I understand why there is a need for those, especially for people that are diabetic and going through a lot with that. But how can we change the narrative about these shots? Right now, I feel it's like, oh, everyone's on it. How can we start talking about it? Again, not saying that they're not good for different types of people, but a lot of people do not need them, and there's other ways to go about it.
Yes, it can become just an easy go-to because it is very easy to get prescribed these drugs these days. But it's important to also think about, what does health look like for you? Because so often when we think about health, and particularly in moments of transitions like pregnancy or menopause, we immediately think first of our weight, right? And we think, well, I need to lose weight. But we really should be taking a more holistic look at what health means. And that's not often what happens individually or collectively in our society. And so there are other factors that play into this, right? Am I eating foods that I enjoy, that give me energy and help me feel like I can move about my day? Am I getting enough rest, which we know can obviously be hard when you've got little ones at home, right? But are there ways when I could try to get rest? Like, maybe could I possibly actually nap when the kids are napping, even though that's hard? Am I kind of doing some joyful movement where I'm just moving my bodies in ways that make me feel better, right? And thinking about all these different elements that play into kind of our health, but also who we are as people, right? And looking in the mirror and saying, okay, I am not just my weight, I am all these other things, right? And thinking about our identity more holistically. So we also have to recognize that transitions can take time. So yes, we may want to lose that baby weight, for instance, but we don't need to get on a GLP-1 necessarily to lose that right away, right? Maybe our bodies need some time. Maybe we need a good year to be able to get back to where we were at. There's sort of this thinking that we need to instantly bounce back. And that messaging is very prevalent for women, that you need to bounce back to the pre-baby weight. If you don't, you're somehow failing. And we need to be gentler with ourselves. This is particularly true for people who have had lived experience with an eating disorder, because doctors in general get 0 to 2 hours of training on eating disorders, which is something I explore a lot in the book. And it's just mind boggling. But as a result, sometimes individuals are getting prescribed these GLP-1s without necessarily being screened for current or past eating disorders. And times there's been some news stories about this, these can be triggering. So it's just important to also think about your pre-existing conditions, if you've had an eating disorder, and whether or not these drugs could put you in a more vulnerable spot.
Yes, all of the night. With slips, Would you say that a lot of people have these slips due to like internal struggles or exterior with their social circles?
I would say it's both. I think that many people slip because they are grappling with something internally, whether it's emotions that they're not quite sure how to deal with, or just a feeling of being overwhelmed or anxious. We know that anxiety, for instance, is a very common comorbidity with eating disorders. But other times it can be external, where maybe we're consuming really toxic content on social media, or maybe we're in a toxic relationship with someone who's not treating us, with respect, and not treating our bodies with respect. So it often can be a mix of both external and internal factors. And when we have those two factors working together, then it can make the slips feel even more pronounced.
I really want to first thank you for your time. I know that this is going to resonate with so many people out there, and maybe give themselves the courage to take charge of what's going on in their body, in their mind. I end the interview always with this question because stress is everywhere. And kind of what you were saying, we have the kind of seasons of life where some things are great, and then we have this gray area, this middle place in between. So I'm just curious, how has stress saved your life?
So for me, stress in a lot of ways keeps me going. I mean, we tend to demonize stress, but stress often keeps me working really hard, because even now, as I think about the book being out in the world, I want people to read this, and I really want this to do well. And that can create these stressful moments. But that stress also motivates me to get the word out and to tell as many people as possible about the book. And so, as long as I'm not letting that stress stop me, then I know that it is stress that is working in more productive ways.
Thank you so much for coming on. How can people connect with you? And most importantly, how can people get your book? Because I know it's fire.
Yes, well, thank you. And I do hope folks will check out the book. Even if you haven't had an eating disorder, the book still looks at a lot of other themes like motherhood and loss and grief. And so I think that there's a lot of points of relatability for all readers. But you can buy the book on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Independent bookstores across the country are also selling it. Target's website has it. So you can find it most places. And you can also follow me on Instagram, where I'm pretty active. And that's just my full name, Mallary Tenore Tarpley, which I'm sure we can put the link in the show notes, because that's a little bit of a mouthful. But I do hope that your listeners will reach out and connect with me.
They definitely will. And please, everyone, share your takeaways, reach out to Mallory, reach out to me, and just tell me what you learned. What was something that you found interesting? And as always, remember to speak well to yourself on this self-love journey.
Thanks to Dan Lieber at Beckett Brown Music for the intro and outro music. You can keep in touch with me on Instagram at Sarah Elise Coaching. If you're looking to improve your health and wellness, check out my business, livewellenhanceyou.com. While you're there, join the Live Well Enhance You email list and receive exclusive offers for our wellness programs and events. Until next time, take care.